Hello, welcome back to my channel and today's video. So in today's video I'm going to go through how I made the moon kitsune. If you haven't already seen the sun kitsune video, then you can check out my previous videos. So this one is based off a moon, so they're supposed to go in a set, but the last one I showed how to make the sun one, so this time I'm going to show how to make the moon one. So it can be posed in either 4 legs or standing up. This one was meant to be posed standing up and with the partner, but yes, in this video I'll go through how I made him, and if you would like to purchase him or them, I have the set available in my shop at creaturesofnat.com, and if you get the set then they come at a cheaper price. If not, you can buy them individually, but they'll be the normal price. So yeah, if you want to see how I made him, then keep watching. Alrighty, so starting off with a resin cast of something that I've sculpted. This one is based off a Japanese North mask that they use in theatre. It is a kitsune, so it's been sculpted out of monster clay, cast in silicone, or moulded in silicone and then cast in resin. So what I'm doing now is just painting it as a white base coat, and I'm using a paint from the brand Chromacryl. It's just an acrylic based water-based paint. It's nothing special. You can find it at I get mine from a local store here in Melbourne called Melbourne Artist Supplies. They sell it pretty cheap, but you can find something comparable in any of your local craft stores. I always prime my pieces first before painting, just so the paint has something to stick to, because resin can be quite slippery, and there is a bigger risk of the paint coming off when you haven't primed your resin. It also protects the paint as well from any leaking resin or chemicals coming from the resin. And there's a couple of options that I have tried, and I have a video on it on my channel if you're interested in something like that. So I'm doing 2 different kitsunes for this one. This is the moon kitsune. So I've done a sun kitsune, which you can check out. It was my not last video but the video before, using the same sort of techniques, but this one is the moon kitsune. I decided not to give them names just because I want them to be, I don't know, I didn't want them to have a name rather than just sun and moon kitsune, and they're supposed to go as a set, so they can, the sun and moon, and they can be posed together. But they're available in my shop if you're looking for them. If you purchase them as a set, you get them slightly cheaper than buying them one of them. So just marking in or painting in the lines that I'm going to be doing. This is the same paint, it's just in black by Chromacryl. I really like this paint anyway because it's got a nice consistency and it dries pretty quickly and smoothly, so yeah, if you have this around you, I highly recommend it. Now for this one I'm doing a silver circle to represent the moon in the middle of the head. The last one I did a gold circle, which is representing the sun, but this one is representing the moon. And this paint that I'm using is by a brand called Jacquard, and the paint is called Lumiere. It's really good quality paint. I highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. It comes in these pots. They make heaps of other things, but I highly recommend those for metallic or paints. Next I'm going to be moving on to the markings. So the last one I did was red markings, and this one I'm going to do blue markings, and I've moved on to a different paint again. So this paint is by the brand Golden, and I wouldn't recommend this for painting big resin pieces. I use this just simply because I like the texture that comes out of it. It's a lot thicker than the Chromacryl. It's a lot more expensive too, but I quite liked the texture that it leaves. It looks more painted, leaves like a strawy sort of texture from the bristles of the brush, which is what I wanted in these masks, because I want it to sort of look like lacquer, and it leaves a shiny-ish sort of look to it as well. So yes, they're by the brand Golden, but you don't have to use something like that. I just wanted to for the texture, because they are pretty expensive paints, so you could find them in fine art crafts stores, and they're probably like triple the price of just some cheap acrylic paint. And I wanted the markings to be a bit different on this one. I didn't want them to be the same as the Sun Kitsune, because I wanted them to be similar, but representation of different things, if that makes sense. Sun and moon. Moving on to the feet. So this one, in my last one I used squirrel hands for the Sun Kitsune, but this one I'm using my kangaroo hands. I wanted them to have slightly more of a humanistic look to them, so I used my kangaroo feet for that. So this one's meant to stand up a little bit more than the Sun Kitsune. That's why I wanted those hands, but can be posed on 4 legs. You can pose it any way you want, really. And then the back legs, I just used my typical fox feet for that as well. And that is it. And I'm using the same paint as I used at the start as well, so the Chromacryl acrylic paint. Moving on to the faux fur. So I'm using a faux fur that is pretty long. The pile's quite long, and it has a gradient in it. So usually with gradients and patterns in faux fur, they're a little bit harder to work with, so there's a bit more wastage and stuff. But if you're not too concerned about where the gradient is, then you wouldn't have to worry about that. So what I'm doing is I'm marking out the patterns that I'm going to cut out. So I have a body patterning video up on my Patreon for my $5 and up tiers, and that is available up there along with a whole lot of other things. And you can use different types of things to mark your patterns out. So sometimes I use chalk, depending on the colour. The chalk turns out best on darker colours. And sometimes I use a Sharpie or a pencil or something. Just with a white faux fur, just be mindful that sometimes the colour can transfer through. So just always be mindful of that and try and pick a colour that won't transfer through or anything, or even a little marking tool that you can get. It's like I don't know what it is, but it marks really well. Anyway, this is a good look at the faux fur. So it's a little bit different than the Sun Kitsune. I didn't want it to be exactly the same, plus I wanted to have this gradient marking in it. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting out all the pieces using a small pair of sharp scissors, and I prefer to use the scissors just because I can control it better, and that means I can get the blades in between the pile and just cut the backing of the fur, rather than just cutting it haphazardly, and then you end up cutting the pile and then you can't use it. I also don't really like using Stanley knives or any kind of knife, just because it can sort of stretch the fabric a bit and the pile then comes apart. So I prefer to use scissors, but you know, you can try whatever you like and see what you prefer, but I like scissors. So once I've cut all of the pieces out, I then pin it first side together, and I like to use a sewing machine to sew up all of my dolls. I've been experimenting with hand sewing things and different ways of doing the body. I have one on my Patreon that I have made an okapi, and I go through how I made it. I'll have the same deal for a new doll that's coming up. It's a maned wolf, so that will be over on my Patreon as well. But anyway, I use a sewing machine to sew up my dolls normally. I prefer to use a sewing machine. It's quicker and it's a lot stronger than hand sewing. But I've been recently sewing some joey pouches for all the animals that have been burned here in Australia, because they're in need of joey pouches. And in sewing regular fabric, my sewing machine is old and it needs to be replaced, and it doesn't have a very strong motor, so it really struggles to get through thicker fabric, so I might have to invest in a new one soon. But mine's a brother anyway, if anyone's interested. So once it's all sewn up, I go ahead and cut all around the edges of my where I've sewed. So this will allow the body to move a bit more free, and it just frees up the fabric a bit more, so you can pose it better. Just be careful not to cut through the actual seam, because then you'll have to re-sew it, because there'll be a hole in it. And it's pretty much the same as any teddy bear making thing. I've learned that from. And then I can go ahead and actually turn everything the right way around. So sometimes I use some pliers, which I try and grab the fabric and pull it through. That works really well usually. But try not to sew things too small because you'll never end up flipping it through. So I always leave a bigger hole if I need to. If the tails are too small, I'll end up hand sewing everything. So this is what we have. So you can see the nice little gradient that we've got right now. It goes from black to grey, so I thought that was perfect for the moon. So this is what we have. It needs a bit of a trim and definitely a clean up. So I'm going to go ahead and make the armature now. I have an armature tutorial in my shop if you're interested in something like that at creaturesofnat.com, so you can learn how I make my armatures. And then I can insert it inside of the body and then attach all of the pieces. That's also in my shop if you're interested in that tutorial as well. And then I usually leave it overnight to cure and get strong, and then I can move on to the next step. Alright, so once I've attached all the pieces, I can start gluing the fabric to the resin, and I like to use a tacky fabric glue. I get mine from Spotlight here in Australia, which is just like a crafty haberdashery store. And it works really well to attach fabrics to resin, and you can find anything like that in your local craft store. It doesn't have to be any particular brand, but it's like a clear tacky, sticky, thick glue, and it usually takes about maybe a couple of minutes to actually adhere, and then you leave it overnight and it will dry pretty solid. So once I've done that, I can go ahead and add some stuffing and actually start sewing things up. So the polyfill that I use for the stuffing is called polyfill, but it's just basically the stuff that you find in cushions, and you can get it in your local craft stores. So I use a ladder stitch to join the pieces together. I have a video on my channel if you don't know how to do a ladder stitch, but it's always good to get a nice quality thread as well, because that will help a lot, or a thick thread, something that will have a bit of strength behind it, because you don't want to snap it. I hate sewing, so anything to avoid doing any hand sewing. That's why I use a machine. So once I've sewn that up, I can then attach the legs to the resin hands, and using that same glue, and leave it overnight again, and it will start to adhere. So once that's dry, I can start sewing up the back end of the body, and adding any more polyfill to the doll. So that's pretty much it for this doll. Like I said at the start, it is available in my shop or as a pair, the Sun and Moon Kitsune. I made a little necklace for the both of them. It's sort of representing the sun and the moon. So the other one's red and this one is blue to match the little markings. So yes, like I said, it's in my shop at creaturesofnat.com. If you want the pair, they come at a discounted price. And thanks to my patrons for supporting me again. I really do appreciate it. And if you'd like to support, the link will be down the bottom below. But you can also check me out on Instagram and Facebook at Creatures of Nat. And I'll probably catch you in the next one. Bye.